Is Chris Rufo. We are now beginning the space titled How the Right Can Defeat Woke Capital. The goal of this space is to continue conversations that we've been having over the past few months about political strategy for American conservatives, about tactics that can be useful for the American right. And I think one of the most interesting and dynamic parts of the political landscape right now is this really significant shift in the politics of America's Fortune 500 companies. Historically, if you look back from the 1980s to the present, companies were seen as really part and parcel of the American right, from the Reagan Revolution through the Bush years. American conservative politicians promised favorable economic conditions for companies, reducing taxes, eliminating regulations, and in exchange, corporations were largely supportive of the right politically. I mean, this isn't a surprise to anyone. Back to Marx even. Capital was always seen as a kind of a part and parcel with the American right. This has shifted. American companies have been have secured what they needed from the political right, and then have been seeking to appease or to mollify or even to appeal to the cultural left on issues of race, gender, sexuality, and a whole range of other cultural concerns. And so the idea behind this space is to introduce some guests who are really at the forefront of this fight. We have Libs of TikTok, who of course needs no introduction. She's been highlighting especially issues of gender in schools and companies and advertising, been very effective in mobilizing public opinion. We have Peachy Keenan, a writer for The American Mind and others, who has actually worked inside of one of the wokest corporations in America. She's going to actually reveal that for the first time here today, and is a great writer, great a political thinker, and has some particular insights. We also have Matt Nee from WPAI Strategies. He's a pollster. He's a political strategist. He's worked on winning campaigns for many Republican, national and statewide Republican candidates. And he's done some specific opinion polling and research on the questions of woke capital, conservative boycott efforts. He'll have the data to really bring to mathematical specificity answers to some of these questions. And then in the second hour, we're going to be having Matt Walsh come on the space, talking about what the Daily Wire has done, providing what I think is an essential counterbalance, at least in media, and now expanding into children's entertainment and some other products to get their insights about how you can put competitive and business pressure on some of these woke companies. And so what we'll do, the format will be I'll go around. We'll have some opening statements from panelists, just setting the frame for the discussion. Then in the second hour, we'll take questions. We'll welcome Matt Walsh into the space, and we'll go from there. So just want to start with you, Libs of TikTok, Kaya. Talk to us in particular about Bud Light. I think there was a moment where it seemed like you were feuding with Dylan Mulvaney very regularly in a very high-profile way, bringing this story to national media attention. And I remember at the beginning thinking, I wonder if this is a wise tactic to elevate this person, to draw attention to this person. And I really wasn't sure. But then something incredible happened. It really sparked this Bud Light boycott that was, I think, the most successful conservative-led boycott in history. The reporting suggests that Bud Light took a $400 million loss in annual revenues. They haven't recovered. And so I think this is a really good example of a spontaneous, conservative-led, social media-led rebellion against this company that's done lasting damage. So take us to the beginning. Take us back to how this emerged as a conflict, how you thought about it, and then how it played out, that it went from, kind of social media spectacle to a real culture war victory.
Hi, Chris. This is exciting to be here. So, yeah, the Bud Light story. So, first of all, let me issue a correction because I went on Megyn Kelly a couple months ago and she asked me if I thought that this Bud Light boycott would be successful. And I said no. And I was so wrong. And I'm glad I was wrong um, because it turned out to be very successful. And I think it is very interesting of the story of why and how Bud Light became probably the first like really successful boycott from the right. And I'm excited for the space today so we can dissect the Bud Light story and other stories and see how we can use what we learned from that to um, in other scenarios and to really start holding people accountable and to take back our culture. But I think from the very beginning, Dylan Mulvaney started like popping up all over TikTok, and it was just, I think it was just so outrageous. I always look for the most outrageous things. And Dylan Mulvaney, I mean, I could literally post every single one of his videos because every single one is so outrageous. The way that he makes a mockery of women, and he like walks around with like tampons, and he calls his whatever's down there like a Barbie pouch. I mean, it's just like it's so disgusting. It's creepy. He was like dressing up as a little girl dancing around. So it's like hard not to point out how insane this is and how he's making a mockery of women. And he's also really young. So, the if we're talking about like the trans agenda, it really is targeting like the youth. And I think Dylan Mulvaney, he just like somehow became like the poster boy for the trans agenda. So then obviously when he hooks up with Bud Light for that advertisement, it just like spurred the whole thing on. And um, yeah, I think that we have to really talk about, which we're going to do today, about like how and why that happened specifically with Bud Light.
And can you give us just your initial thoughts of to answer that question? How and why did this Bud Light effort work where other campaigns and other companies boycotts had failed?
So I think number one, because like I said, because it was Dylan Mulvaney and he is perhaps the most outrageous transgender activist, very well known, very provocative. So I think that's part of the reason. But also I think it was a good product to target because I mean I'm not a beer drinker at all, but from what I understand, their beer is like really subpar, and there are so many other beers, so it was like very easy replaceable. So so it wasn't like you have to change your whole lifestyle. There are some brands I could think of that I would love to boycott, but it would be really really difficult. So Bud Light was just really easy to just be replaced and to boycott, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in preparation for this space, I published an essay this morning at City Journal and on my Substack, looking into the academic research on boycotts. And two things really stood out. One is goods that are easily substituted. Bud Light is perfect for that. You go to the grocery store and there's 100 different beers. It's very easy to pick something besides Bud Light. But I think also what you're saying, the social scientists call it the egregious act. Boycotts almost always begin from the corporation or the firm committing an egregious act that mobilizes public sentiment. And the technical term they use is negative arousal, which I think is really funny social psychology, meaning kind of emotional, kind of a negative emotional charge. But in Dylan Mulvaney's case, there's another, maybe a double entendre, clearly a negative arousal for everyone. Quite a disgusting display. And so um, I think that is 100% right. It was the right company. It was the right egregious act. And then tell me a little bit more before we move on. How did you, though, I think you did a brilliant job commanding public opinion, setting the target, raising the stakes, making it a salient public symbol. Why did this story in particular really just blow up largely because of your efforts?
So again, I think it goes back to just how egregious it is and just in general how we're all just so sick of what these perverts have been doing for so many years, like completely unchecked. And And then Dylan Mulvaney comes along, and he's like the poster child for this. And I think it had to do with all of us just being really fed up with this, like with what they've been doing with this whole trans agenda and the sexualizing of kids. And this just like was a really perfect opportunity because of all those things that we just mentioned to really just focus on the story and blast it like that. And I'll just say that I think it could be easy for us to just take this win and move on. But I think what really inspired the win was that frustration that we have all been feeling for months or even years that finally came to a boiling point. And then this perfect opportunity presented itself, and we all just like jumped on it.
Great, great. Thank you. Okay, next we'll bring up Peachy Keenan, who I mentioned before. She is a writer for American Mind and other publications. She has a great book out called Domestic Extremist, which I suggest that everyone reads. But one thing, I've been working behind the scenes with Peachy for a number of years, and one thing that is kind of amazing, and I asked her if I could share it today, and she said, "Go ahead." Is she actually used to work for Walt Disney Company in a creative capacity, and so I wanted to talk to Peachy specifically about Disney. What she saw inside the company. Tell us what you felt happened over the time where you were at Disney, and then your impressions about, again, a very successful not only consumer boycott but political fight. Which we frankly we won. I did some reporting. Governor DeSantis did some political fighting, and now we have Bob Iger, the returning CEO, saying that he wants to try to stay out of these culture fights because they're too damaging to the brand. So, Peachy, why don't you tell us a little about first your personal experience with Disney, and then the political ramifications you've seen in the last year.
Okay, great. Hey, Chris, thanks for doing
Hey,
this.
Siri.
Yeah, I was in the belly of the beast, the unhappiest place on earth for someone like me to work, basically. So, yeah, just some background. I was an in-house creative and a senior writer at Disney, and then an Imagineer working for the rides for a total of 6 years with a maternity break in the middle. And actually, this is why I became Peachy Keenan. I started writing as Peachy because I was literally at Disney, like in the office, when I started tweeting and writing. And if I had expressed my actual opinions, that would have been it for me. I would have been beheaded. Um, so at Disney, when I started back in 2014, I got hired as a writer. And the first thing you do for the writing department is they give you a writing test. And so they want to see, how well you can embody the Disney voice, friendly, clever, immersive. It's all about the guest experience. And the person who hired me told me that, the key part of our job as creatives was to always protect the Disney brand. And he literally said, because they have a lot to protect. And it's just incredible how times have changed, like how, the Disney brand they were so protective of for so many years, for 100 years, well, whatever, 95 years, they didn't really make it to 100 years, it was so careful. There were so many rules about how you could talk about the characters and the rides and the movies. And now they just sort of out the window. I mean, back in, let's see, one example of this is, I think it was like in 2018, I sort of had a feeling that, oh, wow, things might be changing around the Disney parks. We were in a creative meeting. They were going to roll out new marketing for the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo Boutique. If you've been to the parks, this is the princess makeover hair salon, and little girls go. It's totally charming. It's one of my favorite parts of the park. It's completely immersive, and these little girls get this sort of magical, fairy godmother makeover. And I've taken my daughters there. And so the directive of the meeting was to strip out all gendered language from all the marketing, from the website, from the actual salon itself. We were no longer to use she, her pronouns. We were no longer really allowed to use the word princess. And again, this is a princess makeover salon where you turn into Elsa from Frozen. But they wanted to make it completely gender neutral. And I remember thinking, how is this going to fly? Like, who is this for? And actually I was the person who had to rewrite A lot of the copy around the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. I mean, I was literally in the belly of the beast. And when they removed the wench auction, I don't know if you guys remember, if you go to the parks, that was always the best part of that ride. My favorite part was the wench auction. And there's like women chained up crying. It's a joke. It's classic. And they replaced the whole thing with this sort of girl boss pirate red, and she's in charge now, and she's holding a gun and all this stuff. And it was just like, what are they doing? I thought they had a brand to protect. And the other disconnect really was just, as a parent at the time, I had 4 kids. I was the only parent on my team, basically. Like, no one in my office had children, and if they did have a kid, it was like one and done. I mean, they just really don't understand the customer base. There's just such a huge disconnect. And then we're seeing that play out now with the movies. I mean, people are done. The parks are doing great because they're marketing to, the child-free millennials, the dinks, the Disney adults. That's the name. Disney has a name for these people. The people who have like buy little Mickey hats for their fur babies. These are the Disney adults. Children are like no longer relevant to their bottom line, but their movies suck. And my kids don't go to them. I really have no awareness even of new Disney movies, especially not what they're doing to the princess movies. But again,
And so,
that's sort of part of the plan.
as far as the management and leadership, though, I mean, this has shown clearly to be a bad business decision. The last number of big budget Disney feature films have flopped. They've lost something like $100 million collectively in the past few films. They paid a huge price politically, did major damage to their reputation among conservatives. We saw, as a matter of public polling, their approval rating went from, in the 70s to in the 30s, people who had strong positive opinions about Disney. Why does the leadership continue to pursue this? What is happening within the culture of the company where they feel unable to right the ship and return to a kind of normal cultural position?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about who is there now, especially the studios. They've done so much hiring of the type of person that the marketing. What was her name? The marketing exec at Bud Light. I mean, that's the exact kind of woman who's now in charge of greenlighting the studio films and design and planning out all the casting decisions. But really, maybe the main villain in this is Sean Bailey, who actually I used to work for long ago. He was a partner in entertainment startups with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon back in the day. And Sean is in charge of Disney live action. So I've shared this on Twitter. There was a New York Times big glossy article about him a few months ago about he's the guy who is reimagining the live action remakes of all the princess movies. So he's the guy who engineered, the live action Little Mermaid. He's the guy behind the Snow White debacle that we're seeing. They basically pulled the plug on the new Snow White based on, I'll take a little credit. Okay. Those crazy dwarves, they had like Antifa dwarves. You guys all saw the photos.
Yeah.
So,
some non-binary Antifa dwarves for Snow White. Yes.
yeah,
Perfect.
what is this? You have a Snow White character who hates the movie, hates Snow White, hates Walt Disney. Like, what are they doing? So I think his first princess reimagining was Beauty and the Beast, where I think they made Gaston like a gay character. And, the girl from Harry Potter, what's her name? Emma Watson was like this empowered girl boss. Just the same formula now is being used for all the princess movies. So, I mean, I really blame him. And he's looking for credibility among, it's just like a big FU to the little girls and families who want to just go see Cinderella. Actually the first Cinderella was his first movie. And that was the one, it was sort of pre-woke. It was like the only one that was pre-woke, where the Cinderella character is this beautiful, lovely, very demure, sweet character. I don't know if you guys probably remember this. And there's no race swapping. It's just very true to the original cartoon. And that was basically the last gasp. And ever since then, it's just been this like slide into total just woke, disaster. And so I think he's doing these for his friends in Hollywood. This is just the virtue signaling they just have to put out to stay afloat among their peers, among the other parents at their private schools.
And, one thing that I learned in the reporting on Disney, I released the internal videos where they talked about their not so secret queer agenda. They talked about putting non-binary characters in the backgrounds of their movies. They talked about turning Disney into an activist enterprise. Some of the executives, some of the board members have children who claim to be transgender. It's seen as a status symbol, or it's seen as something that is very progressive in the social circles in which they travel. And I think for conservatives, from my perspective, one of the big lessons is when a culture gets captured to the extent that Disney, for example, has gotten captured, it's very hard for them to extricate themselves from that. It would be very painful for the CEO of Disney to disband the non-binary, trans, and queer activist organizations within the company. It would be very painful for them to strip out the gender neutral language and put back in, hello, boys and girls. It would cause a lot of difficulty, consternation, especially for someone like a Sean Bailey or a Bob Iger, white males, the kind of the last white males who are doing everything they can to protect themselves while they throw their identity categories under the bus. And this presents a big opportunity for conservatives because we can keep hitting them and hitting them and hitting them, and they cannot change. It's like a very big army that is marching in a rigid formation that you can start attacking and flanking, and they can't move, they can't change direction, they can't adapt to it. And so I don't see, from my vantage point, much evidence that they're going to be able to change the culture in the short to medium term. And I see a lot of evidence that the conservative boycott, the conservative media campaign, and then the political campaign that was initially led by Governor DeSantis that has now spread elsewhere. You had even Congress trying to, congressional Republicans were saying we need to get rid of the copyright protections for Mickey Mouse and let them expire. I mean, it was this great moment where Republicans shook out of their, Austrian economics, orthodoxy for a brief moment to say, hey, wait a minute. The economy should serve the people. And to the extent that these companies are having an unfair playing field or attacking constituents of political leaders through their political activities, and then, of course, from a more grassroots, spontaneous perspective, to the extent that conservatives say, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to take my kid to, non-binary Mickey Mouse cartoon time. Not interested in that. I think we have a huge opportunity, and they have very little counterattack. So what do you expect to see in, let's say, the next year or 2 years from Disney, your former employer?
Well, just one real quick thing. It was really funny. I think in 2020, Disney announced to save money because California is such a hard, obviously, so expensive to have a huge company. They were moving everyone, my entire department, the whole campus where we worked, plus Imagineering was being forced to move to Orlando, like outside Orlando, to a new development they were building. And so they were going to liquidate, all these jobs. And basically if you didn't move, you were fired, right? And so the funniest thing for me was people were literally hysterically crying at the idea of having to move to Florida under Governor DeSantis. To them, he's like this crazy boogeyman. And I remember someone said, like, people have guns in Florida. Like, they just couldn't even deal with the idea. And actually, a lot of people quit because they just, moving to Florida was just absolute no go. And then chaos, and then DeSantis and the whole Don't Say Gay thing happened. And that was like such chaos. I mean, they were like rats scrambling around what to do. And finally they canceled the directive that you had to move to Florida. And I knew people who were literally like halfway driving across the country, had sold their houses in California, and they got a call when they were like in New Mexico, like, actually, never mind. You don't have to do it anymore, because they got so much pushback. I mean, they're just like completely controlled by their employees. So what's going to happen now? I mean, I think that'll depend on the stock price. I mean, I think that what South Park just did was really great, and just totally skewering Kathleen Kennedy, what they've done with Star Wars, how everything they touch now in terms of a movie or a TV show is just so bad. It's so doctored up by their writing teams, who are just the worst possible DEI collection of quote unquote creatives. And so I think they're going to continue to slide. The parks, however, are still doing well.
Yeah.
because those child-free millennials just can't get enough, $12 churros, whatever. So, but families are canceling Disney Plus. The streaming is bleeding them dry. So I think we just have to continue doing what we're doing. I think when Snow White got pulled last week, I think that was a huge wake-up call.
It's a
And
big moment.
I think we're going to quietly start seeing just a walk back, and like maybe we'll pause on the race swapping. Maybe we're going to, I think Kathleen Kennedy probably will be pushed out. I wouldn't be surprised if Sean Bailey is also pushed out, but we'll see. I mean, it's Disney, man. Like, people really, it's sad. It breaks my heart. I grew up at that park. So I hope they do pull out of the nosedive, but like you said, Chris, those employees are locked in.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that the literature on corporate boycotts is again a helpful kind of point of comparison, and the literature is pretty clear. It says that effective corporate boycotts attack companies or firms on two different vectors. One is reputation, and the other is finances. And so, the polling data suggests that Disney's reputation has taken a
Park just did was really great, and just totally skewering Kathleen Kennedy, what they've done with Star Wars, how everything they touch now in terms of a movie or a TV show is just so bad. It's so doctored up by their writing teams, who are just the worst possible DEI collection of quote unquote creatives. And so I think they're going to continue to slide. The parks, however, are still doing well.
Yeah.
Because those child-free millennials just can't get enough, $12 churros, whatever. So, but families are canceling Disney Plus. The streaming is bleeding them dry. So I think we just have to continue doing what we're doing. I think when Snow White got pulled last week, I think that was a huge wake-up call. And I think we're going to quietly start seeing just a walk back, and like maybe we'll pause on the race swapping. Maybe we're going to, I think Kathleen Kennedy probably will be pushed out. I wouldn't be surprised if Sean Bailey is also pushed out, but we'll see. I mean, it's Disney, man. Like, people really, it's sad. It breaks my heart. I grew up at that park. So I hope they do pull out of the nosedive, but like you said, Chris, those employees are locked in.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that the literature on corporate boycotts is again a helpful kind of point of comparison, and the literature is pretty clear. It says that effective corporate boycotts attack companies or firms on two different vectors. One is reputation, and the other is finances. And so, the polling data suggests that Disney's reputation has taken a major hit. The CEO of the company has admitted as much in different public appearances. And then financially, one of the bits of analysis that I did from their investor reports around the time of the kind of furious month-long attack against Disney from us, on social media, from Governor DeSantis in Florida, the domestic subscriber growth for Disney Plus, which is of course the great hope for the company long term, it tumbled by something like 95%. They had kind of foreign subscriber growth that was continuing, so it masked over in a net manner the subscriber kind of deceleration. But quarter over quarter, it basically collapsed around this time, and it still hasn't been able to turn a profit. The growth is slowing. It's still growing, but it's growing in a slow manner. And they're losing money. And I think that they're starting to understand that culture is a reason why. That when they put up the kind of Antifa, non-binary dwarves on Snow White, that it's becoming a self-parody. It's becoming something that is unbelievable. I mean, it takes you out of the sense that it's organic to the story or a kind of clever and attractive riff on the story. It's something that is just ideology that actually contradicts the wishes of the audience. And so my sense too is that this is a big moment, and conservatives can debate rightfully on either side. Should there be policy on any of these issues? I'm more amenable to it. Others are not. But from even just the public perspective, my sense is that, and even the Wall Street Journal reported after the attack against Disney, Fortune 100 CEOs were quietly talking to one another, quietly talking to their risk management firms and PR firms. And they were saying, hey, we got to avoid becoming the next Disney. Let's pull back. And the other point of optimism before we get to our next panelist, I think the other point of optimism that we all have to keep in mind is that companies still are much faster moving than government, than public entities, public institutions. A company that feels fear, that feels greed, that feels opportunity, can shift policy very quickly relative to government institutions. And so, and I think that most of these positions with Disney, it's a entertainment firm, the culture's different, but for a bank or for an energy company, most of these left-wing cultural positions are lightly held. They're held almost because they're as like a hostage situation. They feel like they have to do so to protect their reputation. But once the dynamic shifts, they can shed these positions. And the early evidence it's appeared that we were going into recession. Netflix eliminated a huge portion of their DEI jobs. They eliminated some of their boutique identity programming. So even California-based, very left-wing, very creative firms that have a company culture that is to the left of even corporate America writ large, they're able to do it. And I think that one of my goals is just to create the controversy and to politicize DEI initiatives to the extent that they're seen as a risk for companies on both sides. And so providing the permission structure for corporate CEOs to abandon DEI, to lay off DEI employees, to draw a more moderate line on cultural issues. And then in the back of their minds have fear that much as the libs of TikTok and Daily Wire and others have done with Bud Light, we have the power to punish you reputationally, and we have the power to punish you financially. That's the language that I think companies understand. And so let's go now to Matt Nee. Matt, for those of you who are not familiar, is a pollster, a researcher, consultant at a firm called WPAI. They've led a number of very successful political campaigns at the state level, at the federal level. And Matt, I'm hoping you can take us through the numbers. Tell us what the data says and what your opinion research says about how the right can do corporate boycotts effectively, how the right can push back against the big companies in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thanks for having me on. This is cool. So to start out, a lot of what you're saying is true about the correct targets, but there is another angle, and that's that these companies are concerned with specific demographics a lot of the time. So what we're going to want in terms of targeting, in terms of taking opportunity, is a brand like Bud Light, where the people that they care about, the people they expect to be buying their stuff, is already some folks where we do better at. And we're actually in a deceptively poor situation in some cases because of what the conventional wisdom is in the corporate marketing world. And the corporate marketing world says you want to get them early before they're dedicated to some other brand. And after all, not only are they not dedicated to someone else yet, but also you can, once you've put in that investment, you get to keep going and collect on it for a long time. And two, there's a lot of data out there with the numbers vary, and so does the reliability, but there's numbers suggesting even 70, 80, 85% of actual purchasing decisions are made by women. So when they're looking, when the average brand is looking at demographics they care about, they'll see, oh, well, yes, public opinion may say this overall, but young women, the young and women and young women, those folks especially matter for their targeting, much more so than, say, boomer men. So not only do we have to go look at ones where we think people like us are going to like it, we have to understand that we're fighting against the fact that they believe that they actually get better ROI out of some of our worst demographics. And we should probably do something to fix those demographics, but that's a different problem. So so that's an important bit there. That's something that made Bud Light easy. The people making purchasing decisions on Bud Light, or that Bud Light perceives making the purchase decisions, were a lot more likely to be the kind of people who would support this. And also, but plus a lot of things you said, but also Bud Light is commonly consumed in public, and so you can create a social story around that. You saw examples of people making fun of people for consuming Bud Light in public, and making memes about it and things like that. It's a socially policeable kind of thing. So on top of replaceability and vulnerability and things like that, that's an important thing. So to get into some of the polling numbers, since we've been doing, honestly, there's not that many folks out there who are like, yeah, we want to pay you to go do a poll about this, but we do marketing polls off our marketing budget just because, like, okay, there's going to be interesting stuff we could put out there. We think it's important, we want to contribute to the conversation, and so we've done a bit on that because it's just something that we're interested in and care about and think we could say useful things about. And looking at, we looked at the Bud Light thing from a number of angles, in particular, and we found that what really happened is we were able to get our group to hate Bud Light. Republicans' favorability wound up like minus 43, or Dems were only about plus 15, and but the also important part about that was we got our people interested. Their people were not interested in defending Bud Light. They had twice as many people with no opinion of Bud Light than us, and in fact, we also polled Coors kind of as a control group, and we found that just as many people had no opinion of Coors as libs currently had no opinion of Bud Light, or almost as many. So that was where we were actually really successful. Another useful bit that we found on it is polling the actual issue. Now, of the culture war issues, some of the trans issues are actually some of our best issues. You get 60 to 70% of Americans think there's only two genders. When we specifically asked about Bud Light, and actually we did it also about another brand, about Nike, if people are less likely to buy something because they used this, because of these transgender influencers, it was 60-40, less likely to more likely. But importantly, it's the kind of issue where a lot of the centrist positions are a bit lightly held. So if you then go to who's actually angry about this, because they're the kind of people who can mobilize, it was more about a third, angry, not angry, no opinion. But the thing is, boycotts are still to some extent an elite activity, or at least a not elite activity. This is the thing that activists do, and in fact, looking at Bud Light, who likes Bud Light the most now? Not libs, it's people who don't vote, because this is just not the sort of thing that they are concerned about.
One of the things that I think is also very interesting about this data is, you and I had spoken previously and worked a bit together on critical race theory, and I noticed a similar dynamic at play where it mobilizes our people with high levels of kind of what the social science calls negative arousal, anger, high levels of passion, high levels of activist energy. But it also either demoralizes or provides a kind of neutral affectual response among our opponents. And so if we can motivate our people and demoralize or hold neutral opponents, I mean, those are the key issues. I mean, that's like the best possible dynamics that you can have in political life. And so it seems like this is also a very interesting scramble where left-wing activists are not going to come to the defense of huge companies. It's not in their DNA. It's typically not in their wheelhouse, and they'll get attacked by their friends for being corporate shills or whatever. And so we provide them with these. We can create these targets where we can hit them hard. We can mobilize 30, 40, 50% of people to have strong opinions against these companies, and there's nobody to defend them on the other side, while at the same time they're being held hostage by internal forces like those that Peachy Keenan had pointed out. And so, any other dynamics that have practical political lessons or kind of tactical implications from your polling and research?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few other things. You say that, and that's also where they're going to be less likely to go and come to defense of exactly the kind of brands that are more vulnerable to our attacks, because if we hit brands that are already blue collar coded or male coded or conservative coded, these aren't brands that they like a lot, and we don't have to deal with the Disney adults who will pay $1,400 a night for a Star Wars hotel. Although I suppose that thing ultimately failed, but people did. They don't have that kind of desire to defend those sorts of brands. We also did look somewhat at the conservative parallel economy. We built, because we figure, look, all these folks trying to sell things to conservatives. Hey, we could build targeting models that they could use to try to help with that. And interesting findings that we had were there is a market for it. I'm not sure if it's the kind of market that's going to actually disrupt the left. We found that among potential Republican primary voters, about 20% each for much more likely to buy such a product versus another 20 for somewhat more likely to buy a product. So there is a market there, although I think that a lot of the marketing channels that are being used for it are, they're going to buy a donor list from a conservative organization or magazine. They're going to put it on Fox News, stuff like that. Sell it to boomers like it's gold or reverse mortgages. And it turns out that actually demographically, it's the millennials and the Xers who are more interested than the older voters in ideological products, probably because they're a more culture war kind of demographic. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and my take on this is that it's not realistic, and nor is it even desirable for kind of right leaning ideological company to overtake the larger brands in whatever category they're in. Conservative coffee company doesn't need to take over Starbucks. All it needs to do is provide a kind of place not only for consumers to go, but also for employees to go, to create a conservative counterculture that is self-sustaining, that is financially profitable, that can also kick in on some of the political causes of the day. So having those firms available, and I think the Daily Wire is the paradigmatic example. The Daily Wire, I would love for it to be, it's possible, but let's say it's unlikely that the Daily Wire will be bigger than Walt Disney Company in the next 10 years. But what the Daily Wire can do is actually have, I think, pound for pound, much more cultural and social and political impact than Walt Disney, and they can do it in a for-profit basis, rather than the work that I do, which is on a kind of philanthropic basis or a nonprofit basis. And so it strikes me as the alternative economy is useful at a relatively small scale, providing substitution effect opportunities, providing different means of transmission for values, providing employment opportunities for like-minded people. And it then also strikes me that these big companies are relatively more vulnerable to attack. Any other insights before we start taking questions from the audience? Any other insights from some of the polls?
I think that's about what I came here with. I could start talking about ESG and stuff like that, but I feel that I think that's kind of out of scope.
Yeah, let's come back to that. And so for anyone listening, start requesting to speak. We're going to take some questions. I'm trying to get Armin on my team to get Libs of TikTok back in the room. I think she's dropped off. But we'd love to get some questions and see what the requests are. And why don't we go to Bradley Productions? Brad, Radflix, we'll start with you. Go ahead. Oh, nope. All right. Let's.
Were you asking for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, here, Brad. We're gonna go to. Yeah. Go ahead. Go with your question.
no, I didn't have one ready actually. So come back.
All right. We're gonna go to New Tolerance Campaign. So New Tolerance Campaign, for those who are not familiar, is one of the new upstarts that is trying to capitalize on some of the boycott campaigns, developing tools to contact CEOs. I worked with the New Tolerance Campaign on a number of corporate stories that I've done, very effective. I think remind me if we worked together on American Express. I did a big story on American Express. They were doing some awful things, and it got so bad for the company that at one point, the CEO of American Express was hand responding to angry customers via email, trying to beg them to stay with the company and making excuses for some of the critical race here they were pushing. So, New Tolerance, why don't you make your comment or ask your question?
Sure thing. Thank you very much, Chris. This is Gregory T. Angelo, the president of New Tolerance Campaign, for those who might be wondering. And Chris, I just want to thank you for the very kind mention of NTC in your City Journal column this morning. That is the inspiration for the spaces. I did want to point out something that I think might be important to this discussion, or maybe it's just a topic better left to another spaces. But the phenomenon of reverse boycotts that I think conservatives have found some success with in the past as well. I think folks will remember back in 2012, I believe it was, when Chick-fil-A was getting harangued by all these LGBT activists. Mike Huckabee, led what became a very organic grassroots movement to actually have people patronize Chick-fil-A more. You had lines of cars, sometimes 3 miles long, if I recall, people wanting to give their money to Chick-fil-A, basically. And one of the most popular campaigns that we had at New Tolerance Campaign last year was not a campaign attacking a corporation or a CEO, but giving people the opportunity to thank and praise a corporation when they did the right thing. In this case, it was Penguin Books, which was under tremendous pressure to cancel Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett's book deal. They held firm, issued a public statement saying they would not. And I think when people do stuff like that, they should be thanked. It means a lot to these CEOs to hear words of gratitude, sometimes just as much, if not more, than when they hear those negative comments. Now, my question for the group, though, and I don't know, maybe Matt, you might be best placed to speak to this, but I think that there is an enthusiasm gap when it comes to boycotts between the left and the right. In fact, I know that there's one because polling has indicated that people who are younger, people who are liberal, are much more likely to not only threaten but follow through on boycotts. And people on the conservative end of the spectrum and people who are older do not have that same type of enthusiasm. What we saw this year was not the case. I mean, you had people from conservative demographics that have stepped up to push back against Bud Light, Target, and others. I wonder, is this an anomalous moment? Is the reason for this disparity between this enthusiasm gap between the left and the right, because our side for so long has thought this is futile, or is there something else at play? Thanks for taking my question.
Sure, Matt, you want to take a stab and then I'll go?
Sure. So I do think you're right that this is a new thing, and I think that some of it is ideological. I think that boycotts are built into the DNA of people whose ideology is all about looking for situations where the power dynamic isn't what they want to be and trying to establish and use power to go and try to fix that. It's boycotting and critical theory are just naturally go together in ways that the previously more libertarian, more institutionalist conservatism was a little bit leery of. And I think we've become more comfortable exercising power, and I think there's a bit of a generation gap too. Obviously, our young people aren't nearly as aggressive as their young people, but nevertheless, we certainly see a bit of a difference between our boomers and our young people in terms of who's willing to do this. So I do think that there's some, that it is potentially sustainable, especially with everybody seeing Bud Light as an example of a win.
Yeah, that's the other insight from the academic literature. It perceived efficacy or kind of expected efficacy, meaning the what people believe the likelihood of success is with one of these campaigns actually is highly correlated with being successful. And so it's kind of like the old power of positive thinking actually really does work in boycotts. And I found it amazing that Libs of TikTok earlier said, yeah, I didn't think that she said that she didn't think the campaign against Bud Light would be successful. I felt the same way. I thought that it was maybe a tactical misstep to be focusing so much attention on Dylan Mulvaney, and lo and behold, it's successful. And so there's a possibility that this dynamic could be self-reinforcing, that the kind of achievement of success influences the expectation of success, influences the perception of success, in a mutually reinforcing way that will make companies more and more cautious to transgress, the kind of unruly, conservative social media ecosystem that has a fairly significant market power. And when I was fighting some of these corporate fights, I talked with friends of mine in venture capital and in kind of high positions of money management and investment, and they pointed out to me something very simple. They said, "Hey, Chris, if you're the CEO of a consumer goods company and your sales decline 3%, everyone around you is in a panic. It's significant. Even marginal shifts in consumer behavior are perceived as extremely significant. All sorts of red lights go off. And so you don't have to shift things substantially in order to change cultural incentives." Let's take maybe another question. Let's go, or Bradley. Bradley, why don't you come on board if you have your question figured out? You can
Okay.
unmute and then ask. Yeah.
All right, I appreciate it. Quick question about: do you think X overall now has more of a bias towards conservative news talking points rather than? I know obviously Elon Musk in the recent interview with Joe Rogan was saying that there was like a 10x bias towards liberal media prior to him purchasing the company. I was just wondering, do you think the tables have turned, or have they just gotten more level? Like, I don't know.
Great
I
question.
wonder. I'd be curious to know how someone like the Krasensteins would answer that. Like, because obviously, they're more left leaning than I am, and most conservatives are. And so I'm just curious though, like if they feel like they're being treated fairly, or if they're being treated like the
Yeah,
conservatives.
good question.
I don't know.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, Peachy, why don't you weigh in on that? Why don't you give us your sense of how the kind of the political playing field on this platform has changed since Elon Musk took over?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's been huge. I mean, I was sort of stalled out in terms of my follower counts, in terms of getting throttled constantly. It was just weird. It got to a point where I was at like around 10, 12,000 followers, and I was like not budging. And there'd be these periodic purges where I'd lose 100, 200 followers. Some people lost thousands of followers. So as soon as he took it over, there was just an immediate change immediately. And then my book came out and I was able to gain all these new followers and just so much more engagement. And so, yes, it absolutely mattered. And other friends of mine have said the same thing. Other Anons on Twitter have said the same thing.
Yeah, my sense, just very quickly, is that it went from a playing field that was tilted overwhelmingly to the left to a playing field that is more or less even. But with maybe one twist being that Elon, of course, is now aligning his own politics with the right, which I think has demoralized kind of left-leaning users. So my hunch, without any fine-tuned knowledge, is that algorithmically we now have a more even playing field. As far as enforcement, kind of left-wing, pieties like misgendering are now no longer part of the censorship regime. But I think that the culture has shifted in large part because Elon Musk's politics are a part of the platform. Let's go to Athenian. Our old friend Athenian, student of philosophy, let's hear from you.
Hey guys, great space. Really appreciate the mic. My question is tangentially related to this, but it is so in a way that most people have never really considered this, and so I think it really needs some attention. I had spoken at one point to a very, very thoughtful dean of an important great book school, and I've heard similar things since then. And what was pointed out was that at the end of the day, even the private colleges and these important colleges for the great books are still offering a product. And so they have to, in many ways, adjust themselves to the demands of the market. And I know that your speaker, I think it was Matt, had pointed out that noted the youth and how the youth are much more aggressive on the other side as opposed to our side, although I fear that that might be changing. And this was also something that came up in a very small chat that I have of some amazing professors. And I myself was very surprised to hear them say, when they were talking about the enormity of the wave that is washing over every university regarding the DEI stuff, they just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, it's really not too bad of a thing when you consider that it's preparing the students for the workplace. And so I was wondering if you guys had anything to offer outside of, for instance, myself being rather black-pilled that the institutions are just over, except for the new startup ones that, for instance, that you're working on, and perhaps the one in Austin. But what might you guys have to say, or do you know of any kind of research on this topic about the fact that even the best of the small liberal arts colleges that offer the invaluable education of a great books program, they themselves are still a for-profit business and have to take these kinds of things into consideration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if Matt or Peachy has any comment, let me know. But I mean, look, universities operate in an economic market as well as an intellectual market and a cultural market, let's say. And so I think that, frankly, that the United States should have, fewer, kind of less university capacity. I think we've overextended the supply of universities to kind of a harmful effect. I think the very fact that these student loans are not being repaid is a symbol of that. I mean, at least economically, the university degree at the lower end is not providing a return on investment, and in a pure kind of competitive marketplace, those loans would default. They would be, students would declare bankruptcy, and then the kind of lower tier of the university system would get wiped out financially. But we're not in a free market. The government, especially the federal government, underwrites or guarantees virtually the entire student loan market. The federal government spends billions of dollars subsidizing universities directly. And so I think that the opportunity is for these small classical liberal arts universities to do something that is dramatically different than their peers that are going to be in financial hardship in the coming years. And my sense is that there's an opportunity there where the demand for, let's say, a more conservative, a more classical, a more even kind of faith-based university education is actually very large relative to the supply of competent providers. And the real gap, in my view, is leadership. We need to have leaders of these institutions that really can take a page out of Larry Arnn's playbook at Hillsdale, is actually standing on principle, rejecting policies and programs that might be tempting but offer no educational value, and then striking out to do something that attracts people from all over the country. And the other good news is that we only need a few. Again, much in the same way that the Daily Wire does not need to overtake Disney, Hillsdale does not need to overtake Harvard to have a pound for pound, greater impact. So good question. Peachy, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm just going to say one thing. You were talking about earlier, like the enthusiasm on the left, and it doesn't come naturally to conservatives. We're not sort of natural activists. However, there is one group on the right that is extremely activated right now, and that is parents. And right now is college, just to talk about colleges, it's college application season. And I'm actually going through it right now for the first time. We just sent out a few of our very first college applications. And so I've been talking about colleges nonstop with parents, mostly parents like me who are, on the right or Catholic, conservative. But there's just like now a real understanding that wasn't there a few years ago, that these kids are just absolutely at a huge disadvantage if they're applying to like a regular UCLA, or applying to one of the Ivies, if they're, straight, white, conservative, Christian kids. Like, doesn't matter what their grades are. There's just an awareness that they don't even have a shot. But there's also finally an awareness that those are not the schools where we even would want our kids to set foot. We do not want them coming home with a new gender. If you like your kid's gender, you can't keep your kid's gender if you send them to, Harvard or Yale. So there's just a huge awakening among parents who, they're Catholic, they're conservative, they're not really thinking, they're not super political, they're not as online as me, for example, but there's now a huge awareness of what they need to avoid. And the college list of the moms I know is incredibly short, like so short, like none of the big schools are on it. Like, people just are totally ignoring them and bypassing them for schools like Hillsdale and for small Catholic and Christian schools.
Yeah, and I think another important point, and next we're going to go to Diligent Denizen. Diligent Denizen, you'll be up next, so get ready. But I think the other point is that liberal arts comes from the Latin liber, meaning free, but not free like Michel Foucault style free, but actually free like the kind of noble citizens, the elites, a free man, befitting a free society. And so when we're talking about classical liberal arts education, we're talking about education of a society's elites. And so it doesn't have to be large in scale. It just has to be large in relative impact, and then the willingness to govern, the willingness to lead. And so some conservatives despair at the kind of institutional size disparity, but I would take a Hillsdale College over virtually, every second tier state school combined. I think that's a trade-off, worth making. And I mean, I guess it's a trade-off that's being imposed on us, but I think that it is okay. So let's go to
I actually
Diligent Denizen. Oh, and then Matt Nee, and then we'll go to Diligent Denizen.
Yeah. Just on what Peachy said, we've seen huge demand for parent mobilization in the K-12 space, but have yet to see that start mobilizing in the college space. But my sense is that, as with Peachy's situation, when the same parents who are advocating in the K-12 space are about to send their kids to college, those same people who've already been mobilized and are already involved are going to start getting involved in that. But we've seen that. There's so many parent organizations that are so active. Also, politicians are really taking note. They see that. They want to, we've got various voter segments to sell. They want to do parent surveys. They want to target people on these K-12 issues, like trans stuff in schools, like parental control, things like that. So we really are, on the political side, absolutely seeing that groundswell. And I bet that just as same mechanism as with Peachy, I think that we are going to start seeing a lot more activism on even higher levels about what exactly to do about the higher ed problems.
Great. All right, Diligent Denizen, you've been waiting patiently. Let it rip.
Hi, thank you, Christian, and thank you to the panel. I'm a father of a kid that came out as trans after the pandemic, and at 12, and she was indoctrinated through these social and emotional learning programs that they're implementing in our public schools. Now, I've fought that battle, and we've both come out on the other side okay, right? She no longer identifies as trans. But my point is, when I started researching on how they were able to implement these programs at the institutional level, a lot of it's done through NGOs, right? These nonprofit organizations organize and form a network that run pressure campaigns on the schools, the teachers unions, on the school boards, and a lot of these corporations, they'll run pressure campaigns for them to accept these diversity, equity, and inclusion incentives. So my question is how do we, as conservatives, form our own coalition of nonprofit organizations to push back against that kind of pressure?
Great. Good question. Good question. I mean, it's a little bit beyond the scope, or talking about woke capital, but very briefly, I mean, I think it's already happening. Moms for Liberty, there are Parents Defending Education, a number of other groups that are forming these kind of counter pressure organizations, running for school boards. I think it's happening across the board, and so. I don't know, Peachy. I don't know if you've come across this, but in your kind of parent group, any other answers there for our commenter?
Not really. My advice is, when it comes to that stuff, like what happened to your daughter, the first sign of trouble, I tell people this all the time, you got to get out of those schools. The instant you glimpse a drag queen walking into the kindergarten, you got to take your kid and run. That's my only advice.
Yeah, I think that's about right. It's pretty clear signal, time to change. Okay, who else can we take? We'll just all right, we're gonna go for let's say Mupp Walsh. We don't have Matt Walsh, we have Mupp Walsh. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Is this me? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Hey, how you doing? This is just want to say I represent the Gen X there, and I've always believed in voting for with your dollars. And I got a lot of people. I've noticed a lot of friends that are in the same boat, especially within the churches. But we talk about. I know you guys talked about the big things like the Bud Lights and the Disneys, and I think the awareness is getting pretty good there. But I've also brought up companies like Ben and Jerry's, and I usually get people are shocked that those companies are kind of against what we believe here. One of the things that I have a little bit of a two-part question. First part is, what's the best way to bring public awareness, especially amongst friends and communities and whatnot? And then I guess the other thing too is there any sort of sites or anything that kind of lists these woke companies so we could know where to spend our dollars correctly, and maybe offer good alternatives because I think that's the big thing too. Say hey, you don't like Target. It's tough to just, Walmart's not that much better, but are there other alternatives? You know what I mean?
Good question. Good question. All right. Matt, any insight on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, in terms of places to look, I think Public Square is trying to be that. Also, put a plug out there for Patriot Mobile because they're a client of ours. If you want a non-woke cell phone company, but I think that part of it is just a bit on these companies to organize around. Around getting people out to their thing, but also in terms of the wokeness, I think that Twitter's actually been a good place for the word to spread on a lot of these things. And if anything, a bit of a test where an influencer will put out, oh, hey, there's this problem or there's that problem, and kind of entrepreneur the thing. And there'll be a bit of a Darwinian process of, hey, this has caught on. There's enough people who are really excited about why this is a problem, and now we can turn this into a movement. And then, of course, look, as these things happen, people like me poll the things. Sometimes it looks like they're good. We talk about that. Sometimes it doesn't. One cool thing that I actually hadn't mentioned was we actually polled the actual content of genderqueer. People talk about, oh, you can't ban these books, this, that, and next thing. we actually put out in the poll actual somewhat blurred images with descriptions of what they were actually showing children, and we get over 90% of people being like, oh no, that's horrible, that's not appropriate, you can't do that. So a lot of it is just testing, whether it be poll testing something that's an actual source of conflict, or just the Darwinian process of what catches on social media when a competent policy entrepreneur tries to put it out there.
All right, that's great. Okay, we're going to go to RS now. RS is coming online, so go ahead. You can unmute.
Thanks, Chris, and good afternoon to all. I haven't been present in the entirety of the space, but I did want to ask a question that was related to the title. And just to set it up real briefly, I wanted to talk about the big money houses, BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity. You know, we're 30 plus years past the creation of the 401k, and I think in retrospect, one of the difficulties that presents from a financial perspective is that individuals don't generally vote their preference and indicate their preference to C-level executives on the direction of companies, but rather proxy them over to the three entities that I just named, which really gives them an unbelievable amount of power in terms of setting the direction of corporate boards via the DEI regime. I'm just curious if you have seen that same thing, and whether there is any awareness, either at the congressional level or other areas within the conservative movement, that needs to be addressed in some way, perhaps to fracture and to send the power of voting via stock back to individual investors so that it's not quite so concentrated. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I would say a couple things. One is from some new reporting that I'm working on. I know for a fact with some inside insights and knowledge that at least one of those large asset managing firms is attempting to kind of silently roll back or diminish their ESG commitments and their activist kind of initiatives on the shareholder side. The perception in this firm is that they have had so much heat, so much negative press, so much public pressure that they're relenting, that they have to pull back, and so they're trying to do so in a very quiet way. But from what I'm hearing, it's significant. And then on the political side, yeah, I think absolutely. You have people like Andy Puzder. You have people on Capitol Hill that are actively trying to figure out the mechanism for these. They understand that the asset managing firms are in this kind of strange position where they're managing other people's money, but they're also voting on ESG style initiatives. That there is a real disconnect. There's a kind of fundamental misalignment that can be hijacked by activists, and so I think it's still early on the policy side. I haven't read any of the policy plans that I felt like are the silver bullet or the ultimate solution, but there's movement on both sides, and I think it's movement largely in the right direction. And even if you look at the proxy vote history on activist proposals, even a firm like BlackRock has really pulled back from their more kind of activist edge, I think largely because of the public exposure. Okay, should we take another one? Armin, who should we take? All right, we're going to take Michelle Parker. Michelle, just unmute your microphone and please share your comment.
Hi, my name is Michelle Parker, and I'm a headhunter. And I think as a headhunter, one thing that I've noticed in terms of the candidates that I represent, and I've been recruiting for 17 years and used to work for a big public company within the recruiting space, and chose to leave that company because of a lot of the woke, DEI stuff that was going on. And I think another way that we can really vote is vote with our talent and choose to go to companies that aren't governed by this woke capitalism, like going more towards the middle market, and then also utilize our voice with leadership within the company and really encourage organizations to move away from DEI related programs. And I mean, where we have the best luck with that, of course, is away from publicly traded companies and more middle market private companies with more middle market private equity that's not as woke per se. I'd love your input on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm going to toss that one to Peachy. And before I do, I want to also throw another question that we have from Susie, who's written a question on the thread. And Susie's also talking about this kind of similar to what Michelle's talking about, but in the creative fields, ad agencies, marketing agencies, brand shops. And so, I mean, Peachy, what do you think? I mean, is there a virtue of moving some activity towards companies of a smaller size, as Michelle says? Is there any way to get even some of the creative firms to have alternatives there? What's your sense of how the market looks?
Yeah, well, that's tricky. I mean, because at the end of the day, people, just want a job. And as we all know, it can be tricky now just to even get a job if you don't fit at a big company, if you don't fit whatever their, quota is. If you're a white male, you may be shut out. And are there enough companies that can hire you to do whatever it is that you do? Medical schools now, doctors and nurses, have been so overtaken by DEI. It's really tricky. I hope, and I think there is a huge movement to build alternatives, to build companies. I worked at a company called New Founding that was trying to do that and build sort of alternative and grow new ventures that were going to hire non-woke people. I mean, I think that a lot of people who I know who own small businesses are really wary of hiring people who are woke, who have rainbows in their bios, who have their pronouns in their bios. They specifically will look for people who don't have those things, because if you have someone like that in your firm, you've now hired an activist who can potentially become a poison pill, who will destroy you in the end, who will, sue you for sexual harassment, and you didn't use the right pronoun, and you didn't support their transition, or whatever it is, and name the thing. But meanwhile, we have people like my sister, who is a lawyer who now works for a big kind of law review company, a huge global company. And she's conservative, and she's forced to undergo upwards of 50 struggle sessions a year on various topics. Every week, she'll send me a screenshot from one of her sessions, like Transgender Awareness Day, Women's History Day, Queer, Indigenous, Disabled Peoples Day. Like every week, she has it takes away from her work. She has children, and she's forced to do all of these struggle sessions, but there just is no alternative job. There aren't, this is just sort of starting out. I mean, I hope that one day, like you, Chris, you were talking about Daily Wire. I mean, right now, if you're a screenwriter, I have friends who are writers, who are directors, producers, they're kind of still stuck in the old system. The Daily Wire is sort of the only game in town. Jeremy Boring, God bless him, he is, doing great work, but there just isn't enough money in the pot to be producing 10, 20 features a year, 100 different series a year. There just aren't enough production companies and movie companies. And there's all this creativity on the right. And Chris and I have talked about this a lot. We desperately need alternatives. We need 100 Daily Wires. We need 100 publishing companies that will stop putting out, if you walk into a bookstore, you'll see what's on the YA shelves. It's all queer, non-binary furries who are vampires and werewolves. That's just what is out there. And so it's up to us, people listening. We don't like woke capital. Well, you do have to sort of build your own. You do have to sort of figure out what talents you have and go make it happen. One other thing I'll say is I have these teenage sons who are going to be looking for jobs in a few years. And that fills me with horror. Like, hopefully Chris can one day hire them for his nonprofit or something, because I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah, I think, it is interesting. It's, the big companies too, the news came out from Bloomberg. I think the statistic was slightly misleading, but there was a kind of net change in employment at the big firms between like I think 2020 and 2021. And something like 95% of the net was for, so-called BIPOC employees. So you kind of have this massive disproportionate hiring based on identity quotas, formal or informal affirmative action programs. And then you see this, I think in university admissions, you see what is, purposeful, deliberate, statistically measurable discrimination against white applicants and especially Asian applicants. My kids happen to be half white, half Asian, so they're doubly, penalized as they get of age for applying. And so, what do you I always think like, well, how do I explain this to them? It seems very bizarre to have that conversation, but I think you have to be honest. You have to say, hey, this is the system. This is why it's wrong. But this is the reality that you're facing. Here's what you need to do to overcome it. Here's what you need to do to prepare yourselves. And keep in mind, my kids and your kids, are very fortunate, have a lot going for them, have resources that others do not have. And so it's a fine balance. But I think that what I'm encouraging my kids to do, I'd be curious to hear from you, Peachy, and as well you, Matt, how you think about it is, be prepared to be entrepreneurial. Be prepared to have your own firm. Be prepared to have a variety of different business opportunities, employment relationships. Master some skill, master some specialty, so that you can kind of be the master of your own domain. That to me seems like a much better gamble than saying, I hope that in 20 years you too could be putting your pronouns on your Zoom meeting or whatever. It doesn't strike me as a very positive life outcome.
Yeah, I wouldn't want my children suffering, my sister's fate. Absolutely not. And I think that's great advice. My oldest definitely wants to start his own business.
Yeah.
If that's their interest, they should find a niche and try to exploit it and gear themselves towards that. Unfortunately, not every kid can do that. There are some kids who are going to be beholden on, getting hired to write something or having to go to a publishing company or being hired by an advertising company. As a creative, this was my cross to bear. I had, like, if I wanted to do this certain field, basically Disney was one of my only choices. So it's scary. It's like way beyond what school they go to, homeschooling them, what college they go to. It's really where they're going to be in 20, 30 years, making a living in the current environment.
That's right. All right, we're going to take some other questions. Let's go to Foxy Farmer, and then we'll go to ESO Wealth. Foxy Farmer,
Hey,
you've been waiting patiently. Let her rip.
thank you for hosting today. It's been fantastic. I don't know where Libs of TikTok went. Did she leave?
I think she dropped off.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to ask her something, but anyway, thank you for doing this space. Peachy, I found your testimony to be super interesting, and thank you for sharing your experience with Disney. I am just somebody who's been working on all this on the ground. I was very involved in Virginia with Glenn Youngkin and trying to help him, achieve his goal to win and whatnot with everything that was going on there. And this week, I don't know if you all saw this, Christopher, did you see that the students in Loudoun County held a walkout to try and boycott the shared bathrooms?
I did not, but that's a welcome development.
Yeah, it was actually made national news, definitely all over the local news. But yeah, they've had enough. I mean, I think after that girl got raped in the bathroom in the high school there, that they'd had enough. So they don't want to share their locker rooms anymore, and they're staging walkouts now. So I'm just really proud of the youth, and I really attribute that to those of you online who started fighting, like the Libs of TikTok and whatnot. I mean, everybody took a lot of heat because it was really scary to fight this at first. You got a lot of death.
That's right, and
death threats and whatnot.
Matt, can you also share insight? That race in Virginia with Glenn Youngkin was a touchstone. It foregrounded a lot of these issues. If you're at liberty to do so, can you share some of your insights on that?
I'm sorry, cough. Absolutely. So, for background, first of all, thank you, Foxy, for for working on that race. It was a really great thing we all did for the country. So we did the polling and data for Youngkin, and we still are doing polling and data for his operation for this year. For those who don't know, there are the entire state legislature is up in Virginia in on Tuesday. Uh, we have the chance to get a trifecta there and give Governor Youngkin the opportunity to pass everything that he needs. So, anyone in Virginia, if you have friends in Virginia, please do make sure that they get out and that they vote because this is going to be a close one, and we really can actually turn Virginia into a red trifecta. We're so close, so close.
Great.
But in terms of how that stuff worked, I mean, look, the parent stuff was absolutely key, and a lot of it was just some of the very basic stuff. Kids aren't learning, and that was the way that we pivoted the culture war stuff. We talked about it, and there were a lot of very well targeted ads about it, but it wasn't the primary thing. The primary thing was just the basic: kids aren't learning, kids aren't safe, all of this and all of these other things that they're focusing on are distractions from the things that are needed. They aren't accomplishing the basics, but yet they're spending all this time on DI, this and that, and that's just a luxury. Like it or not, it's a luxury at minimum. Also, the biggest gift that we had was what was his opponent's comments about parental control, and that actually has become the touchstone, and it's such an effective issue. And we have lots of campaigns that are using that framing now because it goes to people's core identities. You have these union bosses and the people who they own actually saying, "Hey, you don't control your kids. We own your kids. We own the way that your kids are going to be raised," and that triggers people. That triggers people's emotions. It attacks their identity. So it's a very effective thing to talk about, and it's the kind of thing that can really get folks in the middle because it's not about a controversial policy. It's about them and their children.
That's right. That's right. All right, let's go to Marlon. Marlon. Oh no, ESO. Sorry, we're gonna go to ESO
Okay.
first, and then to you, Marlon.
All right, no problem.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I actually work in what would be probably at one point considered woke capital. We have about 300 billion in assets under management, and I want to say first of all that things looked bad in 2020. We had BlackRock as a partner who had different marketing pieces for our company that would say, why it's okay to riot and things along those lines, kind of mid 2020, where there were these approved marketing pieces that we would send out. I wouldn't, but some people would send out to try to get investments, and it really I don't know what it had to do with increasing people's wealth. Clearly it had nothing to do with it. It had something to do with a whole other agenda. But I want to say that at this point, 3 years later, I went to our quote unquote diversity meeting. They've dropped the word equity from the DEI. It's just diversity and inclusion now. There's no longer equity in there. So it seems like things are changing internally at some of these big asset managers. So I just want to start with saying a message of hope that things are getting better, and there's a lot of pushback internally for this kind of shit. And with that said, I somewhat agree with what Peachy said earlier about creating our own institutions, but the way that we got in this position in the first place is the fact that leftist activists are wearing these institutions as skin suits. And now we have the opportunity, as a bunch of people, especially in finance, that are more right wing, to come in and do the same thing and take it back. So I guess my question is, as somebody who's in what would have been considered woke capital, but now maybe semi woke capital, what can I do to try to retake this institution while also not losing my job?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I also agree. I think we have to create alternatives, but we also have to remember that many of these institutions, in recent memory, were spot on these issues, and so we shouldn't abandon hope of controlling or influencing the large institutions. We shouldn't restrict ourselves to the kind of the ghetto of talk radio or podcasts or whatever it might be, depending on the sector. And I've talked a lot in the last few years with folks in large companies about what to do. And it really matters. Okay, what is your situation? What is your risk tolerance? But I found that one particular tactic is asking questions, making suggestions in meetings. I know a lot of people in big companies that have internal groups that they've organized along political lines so they can support one another. Finding allies in upper management. I know a lot of people in upper management or C-suites in big companies. There's actually you'd probably be surprised at how many of them hate this stuff. I was at a dinner down in Silicon Valley with the CEOs of some massive public companies that showed up at a dinner to talk to me about how to quietly get the woke out of their tech companies. And so I think making alliances with people within the company, pushing back. And then one tactic that I counseled someone on and actually really worked, they got a couple programs shut down, is emailing your kind of general counsel of your company when you see racially exclusionary programs or racially discriminatory programs and saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable participating in this because I'm afraid that it violates civil rights law. And if you send that email to your general counsel of your company, that person is now on the hook if there really is any problem. And that's been one particular tactic that's worked that is kind of subtle. So I don't know, there may be others, Peachy, or in your experience in the corporate world, did you have any luck or any tactics of working inside Disney?
Oh no! I mean, if you breathed a word, you would be out. I mean, you guys can't even imagine who the people are who work there. They are. It was a hostile force I was surrounded by. But I mean, if you feel like you have allies, and I was totally alone, and I didn't know how to even find a single person. I'm sure there was one or two, but how would I have even known to even breathe the words to like hint to that person, like, hey, do you really feel like there's more than two genders? So if you have a company you have allies, my sister's company, there was a secret message board, and they would be texting each other on this message board during the struggle sessions, like 50 to 100, 200 people, mocking it, making fun of it during the live Zoom, but there was really nothing they could do because the global organization was so top heavy, and these people have families. They want to keep their job. So if there's a way to do like small rebellions, like I think is the last person in her entire department to not have her pronouns in her bio, and she just won't do it. So I mean, that's nothing. It's like a tiny thing. It's like turning the B upside down in the Arbeit macht frei sign at Auschwitz. It's like the letter is the wrong way. The prisoner put it there as a tiny act of rebellion. I mean, if there anything you can do to just like throw spokes in their wheels, I think is a good thing, and make allies.
That's right. All right, let's go to Marlon, and then we'll have some final comments and then wind down the space.
Oh, I appreciate the space, and Peachy, I appreciate your comments. I kind of just jumped in when you were speaking. I just recently left a firm. It was a smaller firm, about $500 million assets under management. And it's been probably the most liberating thing that I've ever done because, now I don't have to feel like I'm lying to people every day, and I don't have to be in business with people that are, 1 week they fly the American flag in their front yard, the next week they're flying the trans flag in their front yard. What I really think, the big institutions I feel like are lost completely to what Peachy was talking about. But I think that if you can use Twitter as sort of a LinkedIn, and if you get enough people to form, enough startups, 4 or 5 guys that use Twitter like LinkedIn to create businesses where you draw hard lines where, okay, we're only going to hire our people. That's really where the future is. The big institutions, I can't figure out any way to surmount that. But I mean, I've got 6 business proposals that I've been working on with with other people on Twitter, ready to rock. And I think that's a good way forward.
Maybe we have to
Great.
take over the HR departments at the Fortune 500.
We will have no HR departments in our in our startups.
Nice.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
one other option for those who want to fight, we on the professional conservative politics end, there aren't that many people graduating college or in college who want to go do the internships, do the jobs. Even on the creative end, can always use aspiring ad makers. There are jobs in this world and paths for these young people, if they want to fight. And as long as, look, if that's what you do for a living, you stay free forever.
Yeah, I found that to be true in my work. Prior to working in politics, I worked in the documentary film industry, which is just as lefty, if not more lefty, because there's no profit discipline than a company like Disney. And since I jumped into politics, it's like you can't jump back very easily, but you can certainly jump forward in a number of different ways. And I found in my own experience to be more successful. I'm more independent. I have a higher income, and I have different abilities to make a living, all within the political world. So people that are talented, that love politics, I think there is a lot of opportunity for us to turn their skills into something. And so why don't we have some closing statements from Peachy and Matt? Matt, why don't you go first, and then we'll close it out with Peachy.
Sure. And yeah, continuing on what I was saying, especially in the tech and creative sides that are so liberal, like we absolutely need people who can use those things to fight for to fight for right causes. So that is an option for people. In terms of closings here, look, I think that a lot of smart things have been said all around. The reality is we've seen that there are companies that are absolutely vulnerable to the sorts of things we want to do, and it's just a matter of figuring out what the right opportunity is, and then seeing that opportunity, seeing, okay, are there enough people actually mad about this, and is this a good target, and then moving through with it. And I think that we've talked a lot about all of the sorts of things that we could use to determine where the good opportunities are, but it's really just a matter of seizing those opportunities.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, and Peachy, we'll give you the last word before we wind it down.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking of what are the 4 criteria when looking around for like other things to boycott, because I do think they're fun. I think they build morale, whether or not they're actually effective financially. So here's the 4 things to look for. You want a brand that has deep customer loyalty and a lot of reservoir of goodwill among the customers, Disney, the Dodgers, Bud Light. You want to find corporate leadership that's woker than the base, and that's basically every corporation now. And the company we have to catch them making a mistake. And the more visceral, the more visual, and the more disgusting the mistake, the better. The Dodgers, when they had the twerking, the obese, twerking nuns, that was perfect. And then the boycott has to be relatively low effort. You can't ask people to change their entire existence, uproot themselves. But if it's relatively easy to do, then you have a gold mine. And the 2 places, Chris, I would love to push on in the future are, and it's already started now, silver linings. Thank you, Hamas. Finally, these big college donors have woken up. There's a silver lining to everything, right? So I would love to see these elite institutions get wrecked by their very wealthy Jewish donors who have sent their children there, their grandchildren go to these schools like Penn and Harvard. They're horrified by seeing the exposure of the Hamas cells at all these schools. And so I would love to see that really pushed on hard.
Yeah, that is great. Yeah, we could do a whole space on just that, and I've seen that, behind the scenes. Of course, American Jews, but also just wealthy Americans of all backgrounds are starting to think about their alma maters in a different light, and it really is a boycott. It's an elite, kind of billionaire-led boycott of philanthropic contributions to the Ivy League universities. But when you say I'm not going to give you this $100 million, people at least start to listen. So I think that's perfect. And just to kind of summarize it, as we sign off, there is a tremendous amount of opportunity. The game has changed on the right with corporate boycotts, and then finally, kind of right-wing grumbling about universities and other institutions is finally turning into action that is punishing these institutions for transgressing our values and slowly but surely changing their behavior. So we will stay tuned. Thanks for everyone who participated. Thanks for all the great comments. Thanks to Peachy and Matt Nee and Libs of TikTok for being our panelists. And sign up for my Substack at christopherrufo.com to get alerted to future spaces. I hope you all have a very nice weekend. Goodbye. To get alerted to future spaces. I hope you all have a very nice weekend. Goodbye.